I've been telling myself it's always good to get up on a stage because I always feel taller, right? It's like when the news media shows up when your students are making a lot of noise and you try to find a spot where you can meet with them where the camera's lower than you are, and then look up at you, and then it gives me that great false sense of security, being taller. I'm really delighted to be with you, and I do regret not spending more time with you. And so a special welcome to Tony, George, the staff from IEN. Really is fantastic, and really to see everyone wrestling with the same sort of portfolios and problems and issues and challenges, et cetera. So it's really good for me to understand that how engaging the forum has been, and you're going to go home with a lot of just terrific ideas. I'm going to do a little bit of the students have this word that I have troubles with called the narrative. And you hear it everywhere now. And Robert's laughing because it's the only word I banned, and Jason's in the back, that I banned from cabinet meetings, right? Because I always want to ask, what are the facts and how are we thinking about that? But I thought I'd share with you my own experience with the students on particularly the divestment issue and sort of what happened and from my perspective and what I was hoping to promote as they had a very clear goal in their mind. And so I like to title it my sermon with students that I like to call Owning Your Own Mind, also known as my bobblehead doll talk with students, and that'll become more clear in a moment. Back in March of 2013, Robert called me after he had met with a number of students who were talking about divestment and fossil fuels and sustainability, a number of really key issues, and they wanted to eventually meet with me with our board chair at the time, John Gumas, who many of you have met. And they were really smart. They said, we'd like to know more about the foundation, the structure, and its investments. And we thought, God, teachable moment, right? Teachable moment. And we didn't think that they had another ulterior motive, right, in mind. And when we went into teaching mode, I thought, this is our moment to talk about financial responsibility and being creative and all that. And they only wanted to talk about one thing, it appeared to be. And even though our board has always had a student director, I just thought it was just a good thing to sit down in a room with students to talk about the foundation and the investment policy, and certainly, as I said, go into that teachable moment. And the meeting was scheduled with the students, and I thought, I'm going to get ready and really kind of prepare. And the reason I call it the bobblehead moment is, for some reason, student activists, they always want to meet in my office, right? Like, we're going to come to your office. And I'm going, well, why would you do that? They said, it's just important for us to meet with you in your office. And I always thought, well, okay, take over, then I've got to feed them, then I got to camp out with them, et cetera. And I said, nah, let's meet on your turf, right? It's your meeting, you want to meet with me, we'll meet on your turf at a neutral spot. And they were a little disappointed, but I always teased with them. I said, they said, well, why can't we meet in your office? And I said, well, I'm a baseball guy, and I've got bobblehead dolls, and if you take it over, I'm just worried that I'll lose my bobblehead dolls. And they kind of didn't know what to say, right? It's always great to make students a little bit speechless. So they go, okay, and we met in a neutral spot. And then it finally became very evident what they wanted to talk about, because My first golden rule is I will never underestimate students again. They were well prepared. They had gotten their ideas together, the arguments together. They were very, very respectful. And it was clear that this was going to be a pretty important meeting, particularly when they got to the point in their opening statement of the reason we're here is that we do not want our money invested in fossil fuel companies. So I looked over at Robert, and it almost came out of both of our mouths at the same time. And I said, you know, we've got to get our first step really clear. And the students, I just paused, and I said, you have to understand this is not your money. And that might have been the gauntlet. And I thought, now they're going to show up in my office and talk about what they believe to be their money. But you know, it really was an interesting moment, almost that aha thing, because it was like, okay, well, whose money is it? And it led them to ask much better questions about money and the foundation and the purpose and that kind of thing. So with that response, we were really off on a fascinating educational roller coaster ride. And I think a credit to those students because they learned an enormous amount about markets and investing and all the things that all of you in the room know really, really well. And we agreed that we would continue to meet and that I set up a condition. And sometimes presidents are really lucky because I said to them, you know, I really understand where you're coming from, and you used a lot of national group papers and position things, and they had scanned the research on divestment, and they were about to hand me a list of demands that literally was a facsimile of a national organization's recommendations to demand of your president kind of thing. And I said to them, you know, I handed it back to them, and I said, you know what? I don't want to hear someone else's thinking. I want to hear your thinking. And so how about if you take a month and put together your own thinking, right, in the context of owning your own mind, set some goals, and I promise to meet with you again, and we're going to talk about how you're thinking about something, or we're not meeting at all, right, until you're ready to do that. And so they went, darn it, and did that. And they came back with a proposal that I turned to Robert, and I remember saying something to him like, you know, we just got something for free that we probably would have spent $250,000 on from one of you to do for us. And I thought, the students just saved me $250,000, right? And they're going to ask me for that. And that was really kind of important because I was told that they had met quite regularly and argued among themselves. Do we know this? Why don't we? Do we know that? Who can we contact to get more information on a variety of funds? And they suddenly were learning a lot about investment tools, what money is, what credit's all about, money over time. You couldn't have asked for a better classroom to turn them loose because now they were motivated. And I thought, Mary Shelley was right. There are times when you create Frankenstein. And I thought, I better start reading now so that when we get back at the next meeting, they're going to ask me about returns and diversified investments, what are commingled funds, and all this stuff. And I probably had to do a lot of reading on my own. But it also set the occasion for a conversation with students that I think was critically important, that they really learned much about the roles and responsibility of the foundation directors. The young people believe, perhaps mistakenly, that if I had simply said, we're doing that the president just simply orders it and it gets done, right? Like if they said, we want free parking, I would just say, okay, you got it, it just gets done. And it introduced them to the way in which collaborative consensus decision-making models occur, even at the board level with our advancement board. And it really was a wonderful lesson that I hope they'll take to them with them when they become board members as well. We agreed that we would continue to meet, and that when I finished the report, and if I had my questions answered, that I promised them that I would take it to the foundation board, which I did. And over about 6 to 8 weeks. And what was so interesting is that the foundation board read it, did their homework, came back almost way too quickly and said, we're doing this. And it was really quite a surprise in how thoroughly and forthrightly the board organized, set up a committee on sustainability and divestment, and then went about looking through the portfolio to answer a lot of the questions that you went through. And again, because of their understanding of the responsibilities of foundation board directors, the whole notion of fiduciary responsibility and relationship and what it means, et cetera, the whole issue of source of funds, third-party funds, et cetera. I knew that there were now 14 to 16 students that could sit on any advancement board and be quite productive. The board passed the resolution. We were one of the first major publics, still probably the largest public, to commit to a divestment process over 5 years. And I think that process is going along really well. I'm still trying to figure out, they still want to meet with me in my office. And I have to do my homework because I'm not really quite sure myself of what the next step is. Now that we've educated them, they've educated themselves, they become very proficient in a lot of very complicated areas. And so Robert and I probably are doing our homework to get more educated ourselves about new tools, new strategies, and the direction that we might go. And the students are very engaged with the investment policy and how the endowments roughly, that's about $70 million now, Robert, kind of in that market, and what it means to have it exposed to fossil fuel divestment, although our exposure to fossil fuels was fairly minimal at around 5 to 6%. And as many of you saw from this chart over here, which is really kind of a mind-opening piece, is that once you unleash this interest, that you answered the question of how to do it. And the students took up that answer and move us across that chart pretty rapidly. And it's kind of like a growth curve, et cetera. And back in 2013, the whole notion of green funds, when we mentioned it to some of our fund managers, just scoffed at it and said, wait them out, they'll go away. And I said, be careful, they're going to come meet in your office with my foundation board and probably me. And we held our fund managers to a standard that I think was satisfying to students. Although students are now are doing their homework, and they're probably raising the standard on what to expect from fund managers, other than wait it out, they'll be fine. They'll be as demanding as you would expect of shareholders when they're in disagreement with the direction of the company. And so it really has been an eye-opener. And I actually use the student divestment group As an example, when I have interacted, as many of you know, with our ethnic studies students, our Black Lives Matters students, our BSU, I still remember vividly my first meeting with the Black Student Union, and they came to me, and they knew that I was going to ask them if it was their work or someone else's work. So they thought they were very good because they cited each of their demands and then the reference. And I hope some of you are from the UCs and Stanford and other really wonderful partners and places. So whenever they cited something from the UC, I said, I don't care about that one. When they cited what Stanford was doing, I said, I really don't care about that one. Right? And they kind of got puzzled, and they were kind of wondering. Then they thought I was getting sort of obstinate, and I said, what's relevant to African American students here at San Francisco State? What do you know? How can we push the needle to help the students sitting next to you in class? And they finally got it. It wasn't that I was anti-Stanford or anti-Cal or anti-Harvard or any of the big names, but I wanted to get them to think about their context here and making a difference on their own campus. And their demands were somewhere near 10, 11. We finally got to a point of agreeing on about 5 of them. And they're in action right now. My Vice President for Student Affairs, Lolo's in the back there. I think our discussion with the BSU was pretty productive. And again, students were learning that I wanted to know what was going on in their head about how they wanted to be activists here in their world, and what can their education do for that. But more importantly, I'll get into a couple things of what I learned as a president, was getting them to understand that I heard them loud and clear. That if they were going to be loud, shrill, bring in other people's work, it was hard for me to hear that. And so politics are local, and that's been very, very good. So my message to all my colleagues and presidents out there is to be open, to be responsive to student issues and concerns, to show up with other vice presidents, that you bring in others on the leadership team, to hear and engage students, and really move ourselves into a teaching modality, right? Into really sort of thinking back to our own days in the classroom. The other piece that I remind a lot of presidents is that students are impatient. They want things now. They have a false belief that the president can just make it happen. I have spent more time with student leaders about the processes of the university, of where the last 30, 40 years of our activism was to open up university processes so that they were collaborative, that they were consultative, that they were involving not so much who was the loudest or who had the most power, but who understood what the processes were to develop allies, like in the faculty senates, for example, that would help push their initiative. And it helped them, my third takeaway in sharing with you is it helps them strengthen their own processes, their own engagements, their own participation in the democracies of their own campus. And the whole notion for me of the importance of where open dialogue just took over everything, right? It made me more careful. It made me more deliberative. It made me more willing to say things that I would only say knowing that the potential to deliver it was within my grasp, or I knew a process to get me to that point. Students just don't want to hear this can't be done, right? They're going to turn to me and do the same thing. Okay, what are you thinking about then? How are you thinking about it? And they did that. And then they said, well, did you read this? And then they'd send me the article. And then the next time we meet, we hope that you'll come informed, right? It was pretty smart, right? And the quality of the discussion at each meeting got better and better and better and better. So it was really a learning piece for my own leadership team. They're so used to playing hardball, right? Their world gets better by learning a lot about processes, and really it helps them understand what collective power means. Okay, and I think that's a good lesson in democracy for them. Boy, I'll tell you, they come in wanting to play hardball, and that can get pretty tense. All you have to do is go to YouTube and type my name into it, and ethnic studies or divestment strategies. And the one I thought, I was so surprised that students just thought it was something we would do, but they didn't rush, although I got a lot of love letters to it. If you remember when the Indianapolis in Indiana first attempted to pass the LGBT restrictions, there were a number of businesses that said they weren't coming, but, and I don't say this as a brag point, I was one of the only major university presidents to say that we will not spend any public money to send any of our faculty, staff, or students to Indiana. The hate mail I got from across the country was amazing. And most students, it was really kind of cool because they said, oh my God, the president's out there taking a stand on something we care about. And so I got all these love notes. And then I said, well, are you going to join me in the protest? And they said, we're with you, right? It was also, and I said, well, they said, well, how can we be with you? And I said, I'm not going to watch the NCAA Final Fours because it was in Indianapolis that year. And they said, well, why would you do that? And it was kind of interesting because that's a real hot item. I'll have to give some credit. My athletic director, very well known, had attended every Final Four for the last 20 years. And when I mentioned that we were going to do this, he called me and said, I will be home and I will not watch the finals. And he mentioned that to the student athletes as well. And so it set the stage for how sometimes our behavior as leaders, taking a stand on something, shows students that you don't have to be loud and shrill to have impact. And I think that sets up our discussions on divestment, et cetera. Now, sad to say, the students that put the original divestment policy together, most of them have graduated. And the cycle gets refreshed, and so the new students will be meeting with them. And I'm hoping that they won't want to meet in my office. And I'm willing to buy them lunch and meet on a neutral ground somewhere. But it is about respecting their energies for that, because they want to do something that really is important. I really encourage presidents and institutions to take the initiative. What would it be like if a president called the meeting and said, I want you to show up because I want to talk about divestment? And I noticed there were a lot of student-managed funds on the wall. What if the president said, I want to have a meeting so that you don't invest student funds in fossil fuels? Put them on the spot, all right? Are your student-managed funds not investing in tobacco and firearm makers, guns, right? There was a very big movement in California. All the Californians know that there was a move to divest from private prisons, right? How, will student-managed funds, will they do that? And I think they probably will. But it's really interesting to engage them as peers when it comes to managing very large sums of money in their own student funds. And so I guess I'll close by saying, does a foundation, and many of you who manage funds, does your investment policy reflect the values and teachings of the institutions that you represent or lead? And that becomes a fairly important question, because for me, I want those students to graduate and carry those values with them out into their own private worlds. I'll have to tell you, one of the most meaningful talks I had with student leaders didn't have so much to do with investment funds and divestment and those kinds of things. They asked me we were just sitting around, they asked me one day what really bothered me about the recession of '08, because we're sort of still digging out from that. And I said to them, the most embarrassing thing for me was that most of the people that took those funds down were all college educated, very well educated, and very well paid. Why didn't some of them say, nope, we're not doing that? And it really created quite a discussion about ethics and values, particularly when it comes to large sums of money and trust, et cetera. It was fascinating. And so, I hope that all of us at institutions continue to have heartfelt, meaningful, value-laden discussions with students about the direction of our institutions and the direction of our investments that reflect the values of those institutions. They are the next cadre of leaders out there. I want to thank you. I didn't want to go into sermon mode too much. I wanted to share with you how important it is to connect to students, to listen well, as we go about pushing the needle on some very important ideas. I'm very honored and pleased that we could host you here, and I hope it was a meaningful 2 days. Thank you.